as, for example, the recent signing of an operational agreement for the Natural Resource Fund, without referencing that what was being signed was an updated version of the agreement signed in December 11, 2019, between the former Minister of Finance, Winston Jordan, and the Governor. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 is not grounded in a medium to long-term development plan, nor a fiscal framework. The LCDS, sir, cannot be considered a long-term development plan. It is geared more towards monetizing Guyana's ecosystem. Nothing is wrong with that. It's just not a substitute for a development plan, especially given the magnitude of resources available. Without such a framework, the nation will continue to be confronted with nightmarish projects that reflect more the dream of one failed politician over the other. Mr. Speaker, our budget should be presented before the start of the financial year. As former Minister Jordan stated when presenting Budget 2017, the early presentation is a prerequisite for the budget to properly serve as an economic, financial, management, and accountability tool. This is even more important given the substantial increase in the size of the budget over the last 3 years. Although the Constitution provides for presentation no later than 90 days in the new financial year, this emergency measure has become the norm, except for the years under the coalition government. It is opposite to note that budgets presented after the year started caused tremendous stress on human and institutional capacity to execute projects and programs in the truncated period. That being said, sir, I now turn my attention to page 8 of the minister's presentation, GDP. While the economy has grown appreciably over the last 3 years, it has been attributed to the ramp-up production of oil. Allow me to share with you the growth of the economy when oil's contribution is stripped from the gross domestic product. During the years 2016 to 2019, the overall growth rate percentage ranged from 3.8 to 5.4%, while the non-oil growth rate ranged from 3.8 to 4.3%. However, the last 3 years, sir, 2020 to 2022, the overall growth rate percentage was 43.5%, 20.1%, and 62.3% respectively. And the non-oil growth rate percentage for those years were negative 7.3, 4.6, and 7.9 respectively. We are told by the minister in this budget that in 2023, overall growth rate is expected to be 25.1% and non-oil growth rate 7.9%. Mr. Speaker, I have just outlined that growth between 2016 to 2019 was more broad-based. The dominance of oil is reflected in the statistics of post-2019. From a modest 20% in 2019, oil's contribution to overall GDP growth rose sharply to 82% in 2022. Although it is budgeted to fall just under 70% in 2023, the medium-term outlook is for oil's contribution to rise well above 70% as more FPSOs are introduced and come on stream. We know these things, Minister. No need to behave like the government is Houdini. So, Mr. Speaker, while the government's propaganda machine is in overdrive to hoodwink the Guyanese people that we are the new Dubai, the non-oil sector, where the real economic and fiscal truth lies, paints a frightening picture. These frightening numbers tell us, Mr. Speaker, that the non-oil sector is in serious trouble. And as the regime dances in the carnival of corruption and waves the I withdraw, Mr. Speaker. And waves the GDP numbers while shouting fastest growing economy. Due to oil, it is carnage in the pots and bread baskets in the homes of the Guyanese people. I turn my attention, Mr. Speaker, to production. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 non-oil projections seem inconsistent with the global economic outlook described in Section 2, page 6 to 7 of the budget, as well as the historical performance of the key sectors. Section 2, paragraph 2.6 acknowledges the twin evils of declining prices of Guyana's main export commodities and the likelihood of global recession. Yet, the budget predicts substantial recovery in some sectors and massive growth in others. On the one hand, the budget paints a dismal external picture, but a glorious one domestically, as if Guyana is autarkic, totally divorced from the happenings externally. Mr. Speaker, allow me to share with this House. In 2019, we produced 92,256 tons of sugar. Last year, we produced 47,049, and the minister tells us that in 2023, we will produce 61,000 tons. Rice, Mr. Speaker, in 2019, we produced 682,080 tons of rice. Last year, sir, we produced 610,595. And the minister tells us that in 2023, we will produce 652,102. Bauxite, sir, in 2019, under the coalition government, we produced 1,631,451 tons. Last year, we barely made it to 706,634. And we are being told in this honorable House that this year we are going to produce some 775,884 tons. Mr. Speaker, looking at gold, in 2019, the declaration was 634,904 ounces. Last year, we barely scraped in 484,415 ounces. Nothing is stated for the projection of 2023. Sir, the figures just outlined show starkly that the 2023 budget projections for sugar, rice, bauxite, and gold will not meet 2019 achievements. In fact, Mr. Speaker, they will fall short by 34%, 4%, 52%, and 18% respectively. Since the goal projection for 2023 was not stated in the budget, it was assumed that output will increase by 7% in line with the percentage increase for the other mining sectors. Mr. Speaker, this massive infusion of cash in the sugar and rice sectors via the public sector investment program and direct cash transfers on the one hand, and the substantial fiscal and other incentives granted to the rice and gold sectors, including free fertilizer, removal of VAT, and duty-free fuel, have failed to stimulate output. Mr. Speaker, may I say it loud and clear that this budget is not the APNU-AFC budget, neither are the figures therein, so I turn to inflation. Mr. Speaker, nothing has been more characteristic of the mismanagement of the economy than the steep rise in inflation over the past 3 years. compared to the previous 5 years. Allow me to highlight. Sir, between 2016 to 2019, the inflation rate was between 1.4% to 2.1%. During the years 2020 to 2022, we saw 0.9 to 7.2%. The minister tells us that in 2023, we will have a 3.8% inflation rate. Mr. Speaker, between 2021 and 2022, inflation averaged 6.5% compared to the previous 5 years average of 1.5%, indicating that the average inflation for the past 2 years more than quadrupled the average inflation recorded for the previous 5 years. Mr. Speaker, the already high overall inflation rates for 2021 to 2022 mask the true situation facing the poor and underclass in the country. It is well known in the economics literature that poor people tend to consume most of their meager income on food and shelter. Sir, Stabrook News, January 14, 2023, provides evidence of widespread increase in prices from December 2021 to December 2022 in basic foods, all produced locally. Mr. Speaker, I am not going to remind us how that a bottle of Bora increased from 2021 December to 2022 by 183%, that Bolonje rose by 150%, that cabbage rose by 130%, and the list goes on. Mr. Speaker, eggs, the eggs. You used to buy 3 for $100. Now you cannot even get 2 for $100 because of the 2% increase. Sir, with wage increase in the past 2 years, failing to compensate for the rise in inflation, Mr. Speaker, it is easy to understand why poverty and extreme poverty are high and rising, and why more than 40% of the population cannot afford a balanced and nutritious meal. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to deficit. I acknowledge that COVID and the war in Ukraine disrupted the supply chain of goods and services and contributed to the rise in domestic inflation. An uninitiated contribution increase in the money supply, occasioned largely by the rapid public expenditure. Mr. Speaker, public expenditure 291.6 with a central government deficit of $29.9 billion. Last year, sir, it was $615.2 billion for total expenditure, with a central government deficit of $155.5 billion. The minister tells us that 2023 total expenditure will be $781.9 billion Guyana dollars, and the central government deficit will be $167.6 billion, some 11.5%, sir, of non-GDP. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that the absolute size of the budget has grown appreciably since 2019, from 291 to 1.9 billion in 2023, 168%. In expenditure between 2020 and 2022 was 111%. However, that ramped up expenditure be able to generate a tepid average real non-oil growth of 2.9%. This was less than the real non-oil average growth recorded for the previous, where the coalition government had considerably less resources to manage the economy. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure plays a critical role in advancing an economy. Indeed, capital investment should contribute to economic growth and higher standards of living through its linkage with labor productivity. So, not only is size important, but also quality matters, thus underscoring the need for these to be kept in sharp focus. Sir, the availability of oil resources, the government with the availability of oil resources, the government has ramped up capital spending. The 104 to 222 in the best circumstances would have been challenges. In circumstances where the implementation window has been reduced 10 months, in an environment of shortages of the 4 M's, sir, shortage of manpower, shortage of materials, shortage of machinery, and shortage of management.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, point of order.
Mr. Speaker, am I to understand that you can't say the word corruption in this House anymore?
Yes, you can.
You can. Could?
Unparliamentary.
It is unparliamentary to use the word corruption.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
No, Mr. Speaker, could I clarify? As I understand it, if you say somebody is corrupt, you say that's honorable member is corrupt, it's unparliamentary. But
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, I will deal with this after the current speaker concludes her presentation. As of now, unparliamentary. Beep. And I trust that the honorable member, Mr. Duncan, didn't patent beep.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where evidence of crumbling infrastructure, including roads and bridges, proliferate, it is doubtful that the objectives of the capital program will be achieved. In fact, conservative estimates put 20 to 25% of the PSIP in jeopardy through blip. Bigger is not necessarily better. We must never put quality over quantity. Budget 2023 repeats the mantra like previous budgets, Mr. Speaker. It is fully financed without an increase in taxes. Point to note, all budgets are fully financed since projected expenditure must match projected revenue. Whether these are garnered by taxes and other imposts, borrowing, or printing of money, sir. Mr. Speaker, the rapid growth in the size of the budget is also reflected in massive growth in the absolute and relative sizes of the central government deficit. From a nominal deficit of 29.1 billion in 2019, the central government deficit ballooned to 155.5 billion in 2022, an increase of 420%, sir. This deficit is projected to rise further to $167.6 billion in 2023, or 7.8% more than in 2022. And sir, 460% above that recorded for 2029 under the coalition government. Mr. Speaker, since deficits add to the public debt, then over the period 2020 to 2023, Guyanese people, listen to this. This government would have added over $500 billion, some US $2.5 billion to the public debt. In terms of the relative central government deficit, sir, This has increased more than fourfold between 2019 and 2022. Mr. Speaker, rising from a modest and manageable 2.9% of non-oil GDP in 2019 to 11.8% of non-oil GDP in 2022. I now turn my attention to debt management. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 speaks to prudent management of the public debt. That though the debt rose by 16.9% in 2022 to reach US $3,654.9 million, see page 18, section 3.4. The increase is not surprising, given the immediately preceding discussion. Sir, the government's eschewing the use of the burgeoning Natural Resource Fund in preference to borrowing from any and all sources, on the assumption that oil prices will remain high, thus allowing easy repayment of loans taken today. Sir, they are falling into the same trap as did Ghana and Nigeria, for example. Mr. Speaker, it is instructive to note, we look at our public and publicly guaranteed debt between the period 2018 to 2023. Sir, in 2018, it totaled $1.792 billion US dollars, with the external component being 1.322. In 2022, it amounted to 3.653 billion US dollars, with an external component of 1.572. Sir, the minister tells us that in 2023, that it would amount to 4.461 billion US dollars, with an external component of 2.146 billion US dollars. The external public debt, sir, has risen steadily since the PPPC was installed into office in August 2020, rising from US $1.32 billion in 2020 to a projected US $2.146 billion in 2023, or 62%. The country's exposure has swung from borrowing from multilateral financial institutions, principally the IDB, World Bank, CDB, etc., to bilateral countries. Any collapse in oil prices, Mr. Speaker, will leave the country dangerously exposed to situations not unlike what happened in Sri Lanka and Uganda. Sir, I now look at balance of payments. Mr. Speaker, developments in the balance of payments mirror the performance in the rest of the economy. Oil dominates the export receipts of the country in an indecent manner. Sir, it is instructive to note our merchandise export for 2019 was 1,587 million US dollars. Sir, since the first oil in December 2019, oil's contribution to export earnings from merchandise has risen sharply from 41.1% in 2020 to 87.5% last year, and expected to maintain this very high share in 2023. When you compare it to 2019, when non-oil exports contributed to all the merchandise exports receipts of the country, Mr. Speaker, oil exports have crowded out the non-oil exports in a very dramatic fashion. So for all the talk of spending to avoid the Dutch disease, all the talk of focusing on agriculture and achieving 25% reduction in food import bill by 2025, the evidence, Mr. Speaker, indicates that the government's policies are having little to no effect on diversifying the economy. Let us look at our non-oil exports in 2019, 1,567. And in 2022, 1,425. In 2023, we are told that we will meet 1,644. Mr. Speaker, these figures indicate that since 2019, earnings from non-oil merchandise exports have not been matched or surpassed. In 2019, such earnings was US $1,567 million. But these decline in the next 2 years before recovering slightly in 2022. The projection that these earnings in 2023 will surpass those of 2019 for the first time cannot be upheld to the scrutiny of Budget 2023's predictions of falling commodity prices and likely global recession. The minister told us that the economy could be so quickly caught in the jaws of the oil sector is frightening, as the fragility on which the economy's transformation is being undertaken, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my time is limited, hence I must move on, and I turn to the budget measure.
Honourable member, for you to move on, we will have to extend your time.
Thank you, Comrade Speaker. I move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honourable Chief Whip. Honourable member, you may continue to conclude in 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the measures are the most underwhelming or ineffectual part of the budget, sir. Some measures will have no impact on the current situation, Mr. Speaker, as they are merely being continued. As such, their benefits are already being enjoyed. These measures relate to the maintenance of zero excise tax on fuel and the use of pre-COVID rates for the calculation of applicable custom duties and taxes. Some measures, Mr. Speaker, will be of little to no interest to the poor and low-income earners. These relate to removal of VAT on electric vehicles. Ha ha! And the increase in the mortgage ceiling to $20 million. Oh, Mr. Speaker, which poor person can afford a loan of such magnitude? Thousands of house lots have been distributed over the last 2 years, yet many of them remain empty, growing grass and vermin because of the inability of owners to access bank financing. The removal of VAT on the sale of residential properties is hard to fathom at this time and appears contradictory. On the one hand, incentives are provided to boost the capital stock. On the other, valuable income is being transferred to the rich for dealing in sale of properties. May I remind the government that this act has been flagged under the anti-money laundering regulations as having a high potential for laundering illicit proceeds. Mr. Speaker, in lieu of a publicly functioning public transport system, the government continues to incentivize individual ownership of vehicles. Nothing is wrong with that. But, sir, this has a very high tax on the country's foreign exchange supply, and more importantly is the gridlock that has been created by the massive importation of vehicles within a deficit-laden and highly compromised road transportation network. Mr. Speaker, it's hard evidence. We experience it every day. I surely believe that the government can give some reconsideration in this area. The fiddling of the income tax threshold every year is anathema to any proper tax system. Since coming into office, sir, the government has changed the threshold twice in 2 years, suggesting that they have no comprehensive tax reform in mind, sir. In 2017 budget, the coalition government introduced a radical measure to the income tax. increasing the tax threshold to the greater of 720,000 or 1/3 of the employee's salary. Budget 2023's proposal to raise the threshold to 1,020,000 or 85,000 per month is as mean-spirited as it is ill-thought. With the current minimum wage at 80,892, a 5% increase in salary in 2023, sir, would effectively wipe out any potential benefit this measure was meant to give. Sir, in fact, a 6% increase would see $745 of the new minimum wage being subjected to 28% tax. Second, because of the 1/3 income that is already granted as a free income tax allowance, those currently earning in excess of $255,000 will not be impacted by this threshold increase. Many of the members of the discipline services and the health sector who are beneficiaries of the elevated salaries payable from January 1st will not be amused with this threshold change. Mr. Speaker, with the level of withdrawal expected from the NRF, the government could have moved the threshold to at least $150,000 while keeping the 1/3 of gross income. Sir, in wrapping up, let me say, sir, that I am surely grateful for this opportunity to represent the many Guyanese people and my party in this debate on the 2023 budget. And I also take this opportunity to thank all of our public servants who contributed to the preparation of this budget and estimates. As I leave, sir, allow me to share this quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, and I quote, "A fundamental concern for individual and community lives would go a long way in making the world a better place we so passionately dreamt of." End of quote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable members, every year, especially during the budget debate, circulate this list of parliamentary expressions to which we have added shame and shut up. Sorry, I didn't use beep beep, Sherrod. It also says expunction of words and phrases if the speaker is of the opinion that words used in the debate are defamatory, indecent, unparliamentary, or undignified. He may, in his discretion, beep, 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 beep. When the honorable member, Mr. Ramjatan, spoke, I allowed some amount of leeway with respect to quoting his regular reference to the 2005 study he quoted since I used to be sitting in the well. And then I noticed it being proliferated in the House, except just around lunchtime, the Honorable Chief Whip for the opposition called me biased because I noted the use of unparliamentary words in quotes, and I shut it down. Started with the Honorable Comrade Ramjatan. So these words, until we change them in our handbook, and the committee that deals with standing orders and rules tell me there's going to be a free-for-all, and I will implement these. With this, Honorable Prime Minister, it is your turn to make your contribution to the 2023 budget debate. So PM, your clock starts running at 3:11.50.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great pleasure that I rise to give my support and contribution to Budget 2023. Aptly themed, Improving Lives Today, Building Prosperity for Tomorrow, which was once again prepared and presented to this Parliament by Minister with Responsibility for Finance, the Honorable Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Minister Singh and his committed and hard-working team from the Ministry of Finance have contributed and continue to deliver for us and our country by preparing budgets that continue to steer us on the trajectory set forth by our PPPC government to transform Guyana and touch the lives of every single Guyanese across the length and breadth of our country, creating impacts that allow for people to live comfortably with the confidence that there is a bright tomorrow, there is a bright today. That will undoubtedly continue so long as our government, the PPPC government, remains at the helm, driving prosperity for all Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, in 2020 and 2021, our government presented budgets that sought renewal. In 2022, we continue our story with a budget focused on perseverance, that is, pressing forward to build anew. This year, 2023, our $781.9 billion budget will focus on sustainability, and that is building a prosperous Guyana that will remain for future generations to come. Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely no surprise to us on this side of the House that the opposition came to this budget debate every single day of this week to preach that this budget has nothing for ordinary people. Of course, Mr. Speaker, one would have wasted their thought thinking that even one member of the opposition could see the bigger picture and comprehend the benefits of this budget and how it will transform Guyana and the lives of every Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, but this is totally understandable because they could not devise any program or policy during the 5-year term that they were in office that could benefit the people of this country. Themselves and their cronies, neglecting the people of this country, and coming now to pretend that they care about us and the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, they think people will forget what they did to our economy and to our democracy. But, Mr. Speaker, the APNU-AFC will forever be remembered as the riggers, the destroyers, the out of touch, the visionless. They had their chance and they blew it. There is no coming back. No coming back for the APNU-AFC. You already divorced your APNU and AFC. So there's no coming together and coming back. Mr. Speaker, I noticed the leader of the opposition sitting there, sulking on that side of the House, probably thinking about the next blank check. are you thinking about the next blank check that needs to be filled out in his own handwriting? But I feel his pain. Imagine being the leader of a party and sitting among people who have no respect, regard, or loyalty for you, with daggers aimed at your back. That must be tough, Mr. Speaker. That must be tough. All of us listen to the recording, and the people on your side listen to the recording too. That should not happen to you as a leader. Mr. Speaker, I wish to submit to the honorable member who is leading the opposition, the leader of the opposition. Both of us are brothers from Linden, and I will have your back. I will look out for you against those fifth columnists in your midst who are trying to derail you. Mr. Speaker, it is the same APNU, AFC government that did nothing for the people that is coming here now with their bare faces to say what is not enough and what should be, when they had 5 years and did little or nothing but run our country into the pits. Watch people go through hardship and did nothing to improve people's lives, but instead found ways to make life harder for the ordinary people, for the ordinary man, while they enjoy their feast. Suddenly, the opposition knows what is good and what isn't. What is the better level of increase? What is the better percentage to increase salaries and pensions and everything by? And to reduce taxation by? Full of ideas. And what isn't, but failed to deliver the promises in their own manifesto. Mr. Speaker, one thing is for sure. Our government, as you've heard from the Honorable Anil Nandalal Jr.'s presentation, is on track to delivering what is set out in our manifesto. 100% completion of what is set out in our manifesto by 2025, by December 2025. That is our commitment to the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I need to do some house clearing in terms of rebuttals before going into my substantive presentation. I will start with your manifesto, Elections 2015 Manifesto, a partnership for national unity, Alliance for Change, coalition. And Mr. Speaker, it is a good read, but I will bring attention to page number 8. Page number 8, APNU AFC Action Program for the first 100 days. And I will not read out all 21 items that are listed there, but the ones that are important. Read a few. Number 2, I may have to use my glasses. Significant salary increases for government workers. That is in 100 days. Including nurses, teachers in primary, secondary, and tertiary education, security personnel, and civil servants on the traditional payroll. Mr. Speaker, what we had in that 100 days was 50% salary increase for the ministers of the government. And nothing for what they set out here. At number 7, return of television stations to Linderners, an area that is close to my heart. Mr. Speaker, they never return it. It took the Honorable Minister Kwame Mokai to deliver on this promise made by the APNU AFC to their own people that they claim is their stronghold. Mr. Speaker, waiving of duties on fuel, tools, and small-scale mining equipment bought by identifiable holders of small concessions. We did that, Mr. Speaker. It was not done in the 100 days. establishment of a national cane workers and cane farmers conference. This is the biggest joke for the 100 days. Because what they did, not in 100 days, but it was conceptualized in that 100 days, is that they sent home 7,000 sugar workers. They conceptualized that in the 100 days. Establishment of a national rice farmers and rice millers conference. But, Mr. Speaker, the 100 days passed, and the leadership of the APNU said plain to the rice farmers, government had no business in rice production. Just imagine. A code of conduct will be established for parliamentarians. Listen. Established for parliamentarians, ministers, and others holding high position in government public office to abide by, including mechanisms for demitting office. If in violation of the code of conduct, Mr. Speaker, what we had was a cover-up policy for ministers who were fingered in corruption. Ministers who were fingered in corruption. Fingered. Is that a violation of the House, Mr.
PM, beep, beep. The beep is for a non-parliamentary word.
Contrary to the rules that is expected of ministerial appointments. Mr. Speaker, there's another one here. National Youth Council will be convened and its mandate, terms of reference, and program of action produced for endorsement at a National Youth Conference. I will leave the Honorable Leader of the Opposition to pronounce on that when he takes the podium. I say nothing more on that. Liberalization of the telecommunications and ICT sectors. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to have the Honorable former Minister of Public Telecommunications in the House and to say to her, the process was deliberately delayed by this very minister. You deliberately delayed the liberalization of the telecommunications and ICT sector. You did that. And Mr. Speaker, adoption of a long-term sustainable economic development plan to realize the vast potential of this country. Mr. Speaker, it's quite obvious that was not done in 100 days. That had to wait until August 2020 when the PPP Civic assumed office. So, Mr. Speaker, they failed in the 100 days, but our vision, our plans are now being vigorously implemented in a sustained manner through budget 2020, 2021, 2022, and now 2023. Your manifesto, your failure, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, continue with my house clearing. I sat in the House. Maybe I should deal with the last force, Mr. Speaker. Instead of going from the start, I should deal with the last force. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Volda Lawrence, or Volda Lawrence, just spoke, and that is fresh in your memory. And, Mr. Speaker, I only did Economics 101 and 102, and Accountancy 101 and 102, and Politics 101 and 102 at university. But, I will leave the schooling. I will leave the schooling in economics for Minister Ashni Singh when he takes the podium. Minister Lawrence, Honorable Volda Lawrence, I must commend you, however, for your impressive display of your lack of thorough understanding of the macroeconomic concepts that she tried to grapple with and tried to communicate to this noble house in a most confused manner, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we can go to this. It's only 101 pages. And on page 8, you said, and you pronounce about non-growth in the non-oil sector at A 3.1. Mr. Speaker, at the time of budget 2022, it was anticipated that real gross domestic product will grow by 47.5%, and the non-oil economy expanded by 7.7%. It is now estimated that our economy grew by 62.3% in 2022 in real terms, with a very, listen carefully, very strong expansion of 11.5% in non-oil real GDP. Mr. Speaker, why do we have the members of the opposition coming to this house, having supposedly read this document and trying to fight against it? Mr. Speaker, the honorable member mentioned about inflation, COVID and supply chain challenges led to inflation throughout the entire world. Every Heisen knows that. Article for the honorable member to read, a simple article. And it says, the cost of misreading inflation. The 2021 surge in global shipping costs was a canary in the coal mine for the persistent rise in inflation. I say no more. Just go and do some reading. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member talked about the tremendous increase in the capital budget. But she needs to tell us why we had that tremendous increase in the capital budget. We're not only building roads, because she seems to feel it's only roads. We're not only building schools, hospitals, and have an expansive housing project. We are building a brand new bridge across the Demerara River. We are constructing a power plant, a gas power plant, and a natural gas liquid plant as part of the gas to energy project. That takes tremendous amount of money. It may sound mind-boggling, but just wrap your brains around the figure. Wrap your brains around the figure. 2023 budget is transformative. Keyword, look it up, transformative. As a former Minister of Health, I'm not surprised of your misunderstanding of diseases, especially when you seek to use the term Dutch disease. But then again, I will leave the schooling to Dr. Ashni Singh to explain to you what the Dutch disease is really about. We cannot tell the Guyanese people not to buy more vehicles. However, we will build and expand the roadway, the infrastructure, the primary and secondary network for people to drive their vehicles. That's correct. Simply put, highways to happiness.
Honorable Prime Minister, that's the famous title of a famous manifesto.
I remember, Mr. Speaker. Sorry for plagiarizing. Mr. Speaker, earlier, we were assaulted by the Honorable Cathy Hughes today in this noble house. She started by asking for 15% reduction in University of Guyana fees, when you were part, you, Honorable Katius, were a minister in the cabinet that rose the fees or raised the fees by 35% during your tenure. You were part of that decision. All are involved, all are consumed on the other side. You are all responsible for that injustice on the people of Guyana. She also talked about increases for all workers. The Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on a point of order 41.6.
I said the cabinet, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honorable Prime Minister said all of you over there. And I want to...
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I stand corrected. All of the members on the opposition who were part of that cabinet are responsible for that injustice on the Guyanese people. Mr. Speaker, again, the Honorable Katius talk about salaries increases for all workers over the period 2015 to 2020, and how it was some 70% increase in salary. But they took away the bonus from the discipline services. They took away the Because We Care cash grant from their own supporters' children. And then they claim that they had no fiscal space, but yet they were spending over 1 billion, feasting themselves within their offices and whenever they congregate. That's correct. 50% salary increases, as I mentioned before, for cabinet ministers in less than 100 days. Mr. Speaker, I did not receive any deposit in my bank account when on the 5th of October 2020, I sat in the sitting room of the official residence of the President, of the Prime Minister, I stand corrected, and signed liberalizing the telecommunications sector in Guyana. I did not receive any deposit in my account for that act. That's right. That was redundant to the benefit of all the people of Guyana, including the opposition. That's correct. Who received the deposit here? Mr. Speaker, I do not know who received the deposit for delaying that. Several deposits, but that will come out. With time, the truth will be revealed. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member talked about the Guyana Forestry Commission had lots of money in their bank account. But the Honourable Minister of Natural Resources would tell you different. The Guyana Forestry Commission at the time when we assumed office had no money to pay its staff. Had no money to pay its staff. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Katius again talk about the Minister of Education and some family member of her running the learning channel. But Mr. Speaker, we had a learning channel run by PhDs holders when we took over. We had some 40 academic programs on the channel when we took over. In under 2 years, Mr. Speaker, we have now done more than 1,800 programs, completing all of the grades 5, 6, and much of nursery, primary, and secondary. And Mr. Speaker, then the Honourable Member went on to talk about the HPRC. Honourable Katius went on to talk about the hinterland, poor, remote communities internet connectivity project, and how she had a ceremony, a signing ceremony, signing for the Honourable Honourable Member of the House, Honourable Katius. a signing ceremony where some 17.1 or above million United States dollars was signed to commence this program sometime between 2015 and 2020 when she was in office. And she tried to speak glowingly about this project. Mr. Speaker, when I assumed responsibility for public telecommunications and ICT, I summoned the project manager and asked for a status update on this project. I was told that the equipment is in the country and it is stored in some containers in the parking lot of a certain hotel. I asked to visit the parking lot to see the equipment. And lo and behold, the same weekend, the project manager moved all the items to a hurriedly rented bond in Diamond, a Chinese shop, supermarket, converted to a bond overnight and stored the equipment. Nothing was done. You signed the document, the money was made available, the equipment was bought and placed in the bond after being stored in containers. Mr. Speaker, from then to now, and I wish to remind all that the HPRC was conceptualized by a previous PPPC government. From then to now, and I have one here for you, honorable member. 100 ICT hubs on track to be operationalized by January 2023, equipped with 20 laptops, printers, and scanners, 32-inch television, surge protection, security locks, fans, cubicle chairs, installation of 75 photovoltaic system of 15,250-watt solar panels, digital inverter, power cubes, batteries, surge, and lightning protection. 70 ICT hub managers will be trained in January 2023 in areas of computer literacy, report writing, internet and email PV technicians, PV basics, effective communication, 25 photovoltaic technicians, trained in areas of solar installation. And Mr. Speaker, over 98,000 residents in 200 hinterland, poor, and remote communities will benefit from this project. This is a benefit that the people should have had before 2020. This is a benefit, however, we are committed to ensuring that the people will start enjoying it in this year, 2023. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member went on to talk about not getting onto the internet. Mr. Speaker, when we assume office in 2020, hinterland communities were provided with a 1 megabyte per second internet connection via satellite. Residents struggled with slow loading times, buffering, and limited access to online resources. However, in 2022-2023, my government has upgraded and will continue to upgrade and continue to maintain this system. And now they're having service of 4, not 1, but 4 megabytes per second internet connection, 4 times what you give them. With committed bandwidth, without any data caps or limits, residents will have access to a much faster and more reliable internet service that can support online video conferencing, education, and content downloading. Mr. Speaker, this upgraded internet will also provide improved access to education for students, especially those benefiting from the Gold Scholarship. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the corrective measures that we had to take in order to improve the lives of the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we hear about the opening ceremony and the unveiling of plaque for an infectious disease hospital at Lillian Dal. But no one was allowed to have a conducted tour of that facility after the unveiling, because there was nothing inside the building. Nothing inside the building. At the time when COVID-19 pandemic was ravaging the people of Guyana.
Honorable PM, time is of the order now. You will need an extension to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask that the Honorable Prime Minister be given time to conclude his presentation.
Honorable Prime Minister, you have another 5 minutes to conclude your presentation.
Mr. Speaker, the failed implementation of any project to repair the Linden-Soesdijk Highway must rest on the chest of the leader of the opposition. I know he was not a member of the parliament at that time. But to claim that Region 10 is your stronghold and you choose not to repair that main artery, in military terms, that main supply route to the people of Linden, a tongue, a region that is dear to my heart, is a signal failure of the APNU, AFC, to deliver to what they claim to be their constituent. Mr. Speaker, we have secured $120 million United States dollars loan to fix once and for all that highway. A brand new highway for the people of Linden. Region 10, 150. I stand corrected. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable, and I come into you now, the Honorable Ramjatan like to talk about their being the ones to have us enjoying revenue from oil and gas. But that oil and gas approval for the exploration was signed in 1996 by the late President Janet Jagan. Oil was discovered 1999, I stand corrected, not 1999, 1996. Oil was discovered in 2015 during the tenure of President Donald Ramatar. And everything was going good. The only wrong thing that happened, and I have 3 wrong things that happened here, Mr. Speaker, to educate you, members of the House, or to remind you. The controversial PSA was signed by the coalition APNU government. The best deal was not negotiated for the people of Guyana. Again, you failed the people of Guyana. And to add insult to injury, Mr. Speaker, they attempted to cover up the signing bonus, the $18 million that was bequeathed to the people of Guyana. They attempted to cover that up. 4 ministers of their government told the people of Guyana they never heard about, or they don't know about the signing bonus. And then one minister, when he was pressured, said he thought it was a gift. Mr. Speaker, then they proceed to railroad and rush through the Natural Resource Act. At the time when they were a caretaker government, and the only constitutional obligation was to hold elections in 90 days. But Mr. Speaker, again, they failed us, but again, we took corrective action. Today, we have an NRF Act that is transparent, that has all the trappings in keeping with the Santiago principles and has heavy obligations placed on the shoulders of the Minister of Finance to report on every deposit and every withdrawal from that fund. And Mr. Speaker, you know, I just want to end by saying the Honorable David Patterson, honorable, he's still honorable in my books. He came to this house and he lied about the major.
PM, we can't use.
He misrepresented the facts on the Major Falls project. Mr. Speaker, I know I've run out of time, but all the documents, all the evidence are there to show that the Major Falls was a viable project, and had we continued along that development trajectory that was set out by the previous PPP government, we would have had 165 additional megawatts renewable energy delivered to the people of Guyana, especially the people of Linden and Bartica 5 years ago, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to end with two quotes. The first one is from Thales of Miletus, the Greek philosopher and mathematician, who said, and I quote, "The most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. Is to know yourself." End of quote. You, as opposition members of this House, must come to the debate with truths and facts, regardless of how painful it may be to you. And the second quote, Mr. Speaker, from Noam Chomsky, American linguist and a philosopher in his own right. And he said, and I quote, "Nobody is going to pour truth into your brain. It's something you have to find out for yourself." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, the people of Guyana are beginning to find out that the truth for themselves. They're beginning to find out the truth for themselves. We have an opposition that failed the people when they were in government. And I wish to end by saying, Mr. Speaker, they must remain on that side of the House and allow development to take place in Guyana. All we're asking you is to don't be detractors to the development process. Be part of the development process. Because I believe, again, in another proverb, an African one this time, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Let's go together. Let's support this budget and develop Guyana. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, I would now call on you to make your presentation. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, we start the clock at 3:51.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister ended on a note that is very apt to him. No one can pour truth in your brain. You have to find it yourself. Let me remind you that when the PNC left government in 1992, there was money in the budget to build the Soesdijk-Linden Highway, which the PPP government took away and used in other places. That is a truth. Mr. Speaker, I do not know if the word joker is unparliamentary. Could you tell me so I don't use it as a means of description of the PM? I could?
A joke is well taken, and I have made quite a few in the House.
Okay.
A joke.
Yes, Mr.
But
Speaker.
calling people jokers is like...
Well, it must have been a joke for the Prime Minister to sit there and say that you built a COVID-19 hospital and you didn't invite people. Who will tour at a time of COVID hospital? It's just open. Mr. Speaker, it makes absolutely no sense. The government might have allowed you to tour if it was the PPP because they won't get rid of you. Mr. Speaker, I had to shift from my text to deal with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister tries to go on like if he has some affiliation to Linden. It is only when he became Prime Minister you began to return to Linden. And that is a fact. I have been in contact and in Linden continuously. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke about us not having a national youth conference and council. We did, right in this building. And emerging from it after consultation was a youth policy that still exists while your government has none. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe the script that you would have given turned out to be an embarrassment for you. Who, Mr. Speaker, will come here knowing that in under 5 years, the APNU AFC increased workers' wages by more than 70% and make the kind of statement you would have made? Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to come here, Mr. Prime Minister, and tell us about the gas to shore energy plan and the money. But you can't tell us until now, how much it will cost and what will be the cost for the electricity for the consumer. If you fail to do that, then you are wasting our time. There is much more I wanted to say, but the Prime Minister, in the face of fact, ran. I don't like talking behind people's back, and so I will reserve it for when I catch him again. Mr. Speaker, I move away from the protocols to deal with the Prime Minister, but I want to say a special thank you to all the members of Parliament in the opposition side. They have critiqued this budget in a way that the people of Guyana have long concluded that this budget does not cater for them. Mr. Speaker, I believe as well that we have done exceptionally well, because when the Honorable Vince Roy Jordan spoke about what happened in Region 5, the government went and had them giddy up. And so they worked from Wednesday after the budget until now, rectifying the problems. The people of Region 5 asked me to say thanks to the Member of Parliament who raised it, and for the first time, some responsiveness from the government. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, as the Prime Minister talks about the love for Linden, I wonder if he knows that right now, Linden has a water crisis. Correct. And the people of Linden are not getting water. He needs to go and check. That is the reality. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry the Honorable Warner Jill, W-O-N-E or O-N-E, isn't here. But I brought to Parliament the state of Prince William Street, the street I am living in. He stood in this house and told this house that that street was completed. Mr. Speaker, I will circulate it. That street is terrible. And we need to check to see what happened with the money that they purportedly paid the contractor. There's another piece of information that is distant from the truth, since I can't say lie. The Honorable Minister in the Ministry of the Finance said that in 1992 they inherited a state-dominated economy. May I remind him, so that the facts can prevail, that you, Desmond Hoyt, had divested most of the state enterprises, and when they came to power, Guyana's economy was on the way to liberalization. Mr. Speaker, you know, Parliament is supposed to be a place where the government comes, it puts its budget. We then come and we critique the budget. And then we expect the ministers in responding to respond to the criticisms. That is not what is happening here. The ministers come to cuss, abuse. We are going to continue to lift the standards of this parliament. Mr. Speaker, the focus of development in Guyana must be our people. It is my intention today to outline the APNU-AFC people-centered vision of development for the people of Guyana. Our people-centered vision will be implemented under the theme in pursuit of stronger, integrated, and inclusive development to guarantee a high quality of life for all Guyanese people. This becomes necessary since this budget is a disaggregated set of projects with no clear philosophy underpinning it. The 2023 budget can never deliver a high quality of life to our people. While infrastructure development is needed, this budget is structured to focus on infrastructure at the expense of the development of our people. We cannot condone that. Such an approach is a mechanism to place the nation's resources in the hands of the wealthy and those who have no interest in legality, since I can't use the word corrupt, at the expense of the poor and vulnerable, who really should be the main beneficiaries of our resources. This budget, Mr. Speaker, will see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Mr. Speaker, we are operating in real terrible times. Our people-centered development strategy recognizes the need to solve the problems of our society at various levels. They must be dealt with at the level of the individual, the family, the community, and the national and international levels. We need a holistic approach to deal with our problems. This piecemeal approach will not solve our problems. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, men on mission is ill-conceived. It assumes that the problem to be solved will be solved by men on a mission. It has to be solved by men, women, boys, and girls, and institutions working together to eradicate poverty, restore law and order, and developing new humane values that allow our society to progress, while at the same time being inclusive. Respecting the rule of law and promoting a democratic culture, a culture which eludes the PPP regime. Good governance is needed, but cannot be achieved because the PPP is hell-bent on controlling, dominating every aspect of the lives of the people of Guyana. To use my good friend Ramjatan, they are control freaks. Mr. Speaker, no society can progress when a culture of barbarism is the order of the day. The bulldozing and destroying of the homes of innocent Guyanese at Caneview, Mocha, is a clear indication that this government is not committed to human rights and the rule of law. The PPP has committed a heinous crime against the people of Mocha. The barbarism that characterized the PPP regime is a new low in the treatment of the poor and dispossessed in our society. Correct. The PPP has lost whatever links it has to humanity. It has none at present. I believe the PPP will pay dearly at the polls for this heinous crime they committed on innocent people. Correct. And this is more so once we get a clean voters list. It is opposite at this time for me to respond to the Minister of Housing. It is true that as leader of the opposition, I asked Kamaganish Maipol to make contact with Mr. Crowell, and he did. The explanation he gave here is not the best reflection of the reality. When he was contacted, he told Mr. Maipol, and he communicated it to me, that the decision was taken above him and he can do nothing about it. Why come to this house and give a totally different impression?
Everything is done above him. Everything is done above him.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that it was the intention to do what they did, excuse me, at Caneview. And so it is part of their modus operandi. Remember, ropes and bend the hammer man. Mr. Speaker, this budget does not take a holistic approach to Guyana's development. It is the bringing together of different, sometimes unrelated projects with the hope that it will result in national development. It will not. We need to recognize that there's a new dispensation in Guyana. We have finances at this stage from oil and gas. We must note that. The significant difference between the PPP and the AP and UFC in government is the existence of oil resources for development. There is no sense in comparing 2015 to 2020, where there were no resources from oil, and 2020 to now. What must be stated is that they are the resources to do what we are asking to be done.
Correct.
Unfortunately, the PPP seems not disposed to investing in our people. We will invest in our people. We in the APNU AFC, will pursue this strategy of ensuring our policies, programs, and projects are geared to improve the quality of life of our people. That is why we named it a people-centered program. We believe that a sine qua non for development is the development of our human resources. We will focus on developing our human resources. I turn to human resource development. Mr. Speaker, human resource development is one of the most important subjects to be dealt with by a developing country. We need to develop our human resource capabilities in all sectors. We need to develop our human resource capabilities to be able to monitor and audit cost oil so as to allow us to garner more at the level of profits for the investment in our people. The resources garnered from oil must therefore be spent to improve our human resource capabilities. A survey needs to be done to determine the human resource needs of all sectors in our economy and the requisite action taken to ensure we develop our own resource capabilities in a way that is determined by the needs of our society rather than the training program on offer by others. It is the needs of the society that should determine the training and scholarship we deliver. We have no problems with goal, but it must be structured to serve our society. Mr. Speaker, this might be the biggest budget in terms of resource allocation. Unfortunately, the resources are badly allocated. It is one of the smallest budgets in terms of allocation of resources to the people, since it is focused on putting resources in the hands of the rich. We in the APNU AFC commit ourselves to deliver a high quality of life to the people of Guyana, utilizing innovative measures and people-centered program as we utilize the oil resources that our country has been blessed with. Mr. Speaker, we will implement a plan and not continue like this government to pull projects from the sky as this government continues to do. Poverty alleviation and eradication are two important objectives we set ourselves. Spending money to facilitate illegal activities cannot be a viable strategy. In other circumstances, I would have said corruption, but I can't.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the third time you tried to be very skillful in introducing unparliamentary words. So I know you're skillful enough to now desist.
I turn to poverty alleviation and eradication. The critical task before us is to develop a strategy to alleviate and ultimately eradicate poverty, since poverty is one of the key causes of our many social and other problems. The government has to accept this as a fact, or else they'll continue to be in deep trouble. Unfortunately, Budget 2023 has no such strategy. Mr. Speaker, APNU AFC wishes to recommend the following measures to deal with the high levels of poverty in Guyana. We will identify, 1, the communities with high levels of poverty. 2, we will conduct a national poverty survey to further understand poverty in Guyana. Based on this survey, we will determine what is the minimum livable income and ensure those in poverty earn a minimum livable income. 3, we will educate those in poverty in financial literacy and small business management with the aim of giving them grants and loans to enable them to establish micro and small businesses. 4, ensure that our people are literate. Our education system needs to return to the fundamentals and to ensure that by the time a child arrives in grade 3, they can read, write, count, comprehend, and reason. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, our education system has failed our people, especially our young people. One of the prerequisites for poverty alleviation and eradication is the development of a literate and functioning society. We will pursue that. We need a literate society, and our resources need to be placed into ensuring this objective is achieved. Cognizant of the new technological era in which we live, Mr. Speaker, illiteracy contributes to poverty and must be eradicated. 5, develop projects in impoverished communities to lift them out of poverty using both job creation and the promotion of micro and small businesses. We will train for employment in both the private and the public sector. 6, we must remove income tax from all those living below the poverty line. No one earning below $150,000 should be paying personal income tax in this oil-rich country. This budget illustrates that the burden of tax paying is on the small man who is poor and vulnerable. Most of the taxes are coming from personal income tax. It's unacceptable and it is unfair. 7, the use of salary top-ups to bring Guyanese above the minimum livable income. 8, the provision to students of $50,000 per month to attend our tertiary institutions, Ghana School of Agriculture, Technical Institute, UG, inter alia. Special scholarships for the children of the poor who are capable. Mr. Speaker, this is dear to many of us who might not have been in this house had the PNC not put in place a system that allowed poor people to realize their potential. We must make technical and vocational training available to the poor and their children. 11, the provision of increased public assistance to the poor and their children. Clearly, $2,000 increase in public assistance is ridiculous. It is unacceptable, as it is unbelievable. What is worse is the arbitrary way in which a minister can take away that assistance. It is in such circumstance that the AP and UFC government will establish objective criteria for the allocation of public assistance. It cannot be at the whims, fancies, and caprices of a minister. We will reduce VAT to 12% so that it will ease the pressure on the poor. We'll develop a network of early childhood education centers and systems to help single parents and the poor in general. I invite members of this House to go to poor communities and see women departing and leaving their children to go to do security work with no protection for them. This society owes it to them to develop a system of early childhood education centers. We have to get special training for the poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, Guyana needs a program to house the homeless. Guyana needs a program to house the homeless. Mr. Speaker, I invite anyone in here to drive Regent Street at night and see the amount of people sleeping on the pavement in oil-rich Guyana. Unacceptable. 16, develop a more all-encompassing nutritious school feeding program to alleviate childhood malnutrition will be done. We'll implement a national school children transportation program to take our children to school, be it on land or river. It is not enough to come here to criticize the 5Bs, where without oil resources, from the assistance of people, not government money, we were providing boats, bicycles. You come here to criticize it, rather than appear to be a government that concerned and come proposing a network of transportation that will allow our children to get to school and ensure that that burden is not on their parents. 18, we will build sustainable communities, meaning communities with high quality educational, health, recreation, and other modern facilities, potable water, electricity, roads, and proper drainage that are necessities if the communities to develop and not a farcical silica city. Mr. Speaker, why would we be fighting with highfalutin schemes? When we came to power in 2015, we had to put light in farm, roads in farm, virtually every area. We have many so-called housing schemes that do not have the basic facilities, but the government comes to tell us about Silica City. Let us make the cities of poor people the same level of Silica City that you envisage. 19, the development of these communities will demand trained social workers, psychologists, and other professionals, and a reorientation of law enforcement to understand and deal with the many social problems confronting our communities. Excuse me. Mr. Speaker, we teach our teachers to teach. We teach policemen to enforce laws, but we fail to give them the professional training needed to deal with the social problems of this modern era. Our teachers, medical workers, and our police inter alia have to be re-educated to face the many social problems confronting our society. Mr. Speaker, the APNU-AFC aim is to develop sustainable communities with informed citizens that are law-abiding and committed to the development of a Guyana that is free from ethnic prejudice. We want our people to live and work together. Merely saying one Guyana cannot solve the problem. To this end, we have to root out the illegalities and lawlessness that characterize our society. Lawless societies do not develop. We pursue the development of sustainable communities. We must keep in mind the aim of reducing the gap between town and rural areas and the coast and hinterland. Our people-centered vision is aimed at giving all people, wherever they are, a high quality of life. That is what we must pursue. In indigenous communities, sustainability must mean that our indigenous people must be trained and financed to be able to take on construction and other contracts in their communities. While our indigenous people need a fish, it is more important to teach them to fish and share in our national patrimony in a more meaningful way. All communities, including indigenous communities, must be made self-sustainable communities. 20, we will promote community development and local leadership to unleash the talents and energies of our people in communities. In this regard, we will promote local democracy and take action to remove party politics from local development and allow local authorities to function in keeping with the law and the needs of the people in their communities. Mr. Speaker, there is too much domination and control from the center. Mr. Speaker, this approach of domination and control of local democratic organs constitute a fetter to development.
Correct.
21, Mr. Speaker, on that side, they talk all the time about house lots. 20,000 house lots, 50,000 house lots. Mr. Speaker, while house lots are on offer, many Guyanese cannot afford to build. House lots and housing are not the same. The APNU AFC will offer poor and vulnerable Guyanese the option to be part of a rent-to-own scheme. This will remove the need for poor Guyanese to have to find large sums to get a mortgage and will make ownership more accessible to the poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, their rent will go towards payment for their house. Such an initiative will allow the poor to own their houses without having to fund a percentage of the mortgage as is usual. Mr. Speaker, in other countries, rent-to-own contributed significantly to poor people obtaining homes. There's no sense telling us you reduce this and you reduce that, and then the money that the person has to find, they cannot find. The best option is rent-to-own. We advocate that. We will expand the funding for the Small Business Bureau to facilitate youth, women, single mothers, and other vulnerable Guyanese. The provision of grants and credits to the unemployed to facilitate their involvement in agriculture and agro-processing will be undertaken. This measure will go a far way in improving production and will bring down the high cost of living, thus reducing inflation and positively impacting the pockets of poor Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, we cannot wish poverty away. Cash grants, though needed and welcome, cannot take our people out of poverty. We need measures like the above mentioned to address poverty. I know they all would have left because they keep saying we don't offer solutions. I've just given them 22 solutions. As they sit enjoying taxpayers' money and eating, I hope they listen and implement. Speaker, it is this kind of visionary thinking that Guyana needs, and not the pasting together of projects to facilitate illegal practices for the governing elite, family, friends, and favorites. That is not what we need. Mr. Speaker, while we seek to eradicate poverty, we must at the same time deal with the high cost of living. This budget is found wanting when it comes to measures aimed at addressing the high cost of living. This budget, Mr. Speaker, rehashes the same old measures that were announced in 2022 that failed to bring down the cost of living. The rehashing of them is a clear indication that the drafters of this budget have no clue of what needs to be done to stabilize and ultimately reduce cost of living. Mr. Speaker, all Guyanese should know that if this government was serious, they would have had relief measures in this budget for cost of living. Mr. Speaker, we wish to propose a raft of measures to mitigate the high cost of living. These measures will include, among others, 1, vouchers for those in public transportation so that they can have access to lower gasoline prices. This is important because transportation contributes. 2, the waiver of electricity charges for low-income Guyanese. 3, the waiver of water charges for low-income Guyanese. 4, grants of 5 million or more to small businesses based on objective criteria so that they can expand production. And when production expands at the local level, prices stabilize and eventually come down. So it deals with inflation. The distribution based on equity of the excess $60 billion Guyana received from last year's unexpectedly high oil prices, which translates into $300,000 per household. 6, a minimum of 50% wages and salary increase for all public servants. 8% is not enough to impact the cost of living. The inflation would have eaten away at that already, and therefore the real wage of the Guyanese worker is less this year. Writing off of UG student loans and fees to free up disposable incomes for families. Mr. Speaker, this can be done now. It doesn't have to wait until 2025. We have the resources. It would be remiss of me, Mr. Speaker, if I don't remind this House that Guyana did it without oil, with more poverty in the 70s, 80s, until the PPP terminated it in the 1990s. Mr. Speaker, another critical issue for us to address is the question of unemployment and underemployment. While we welcome citizens who have no jobs obtaining $50,000 a month, this is not the solution to unemployment. It might be useful to the government as a tool for bribery and control, but it's also a manifestation that the government has failed in its quest to provide jobs, especially good-paying jobs for our young people. Mr. Speaker, we need not just to create employment, but to produce jobs that are high-paying and allowing our people to have a livable income and a decent life. We know that this budget is short on creating employment that allows our people to live decent and comfortable lives. Mr. Speaker, we wish to recommend the following measures for our people-centered vision that will result in the creation of employment for our people and redound to the benefit of our people, especially our youth. Our policies to generate high-paying jobs are as follows. 1, taxes for agro-processing and other manufacturing with competitive advantage should be removed, allowing technologically advanced, high-paying manufacturing to take its place. 2, a national productivity bank should be created to offer low-interest loans to medium to large-scale businesses to facilitate job creation and expansion. We know that the private sector has repeatedly complained about high business interest rates. We must address it. 3, the Small Business Bureau should be massively expanded and properly managed with millions of dollars grant that allow small businesses to develop, bring new products to the market, and otherwise expand. This should be accessible to all Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, in collaboration with ExxonMobil and its partners, extensive oil and gas training should be offered to allow Guyanese to access jobs in that industry. Training at Port Morant alone is inadequate. There are many other institutions across Guyana that must be utilized to train our people. 5, guaranteed high-paying government jobs. I repeat, guaranteed high-paying government jobs. In this regard, university graduates must be employed to undertake analyses of our problems and offer solutions resulting in development being data-driven. Mr. Speaker, there are many university students out there who would have graduated and cannot find a job. If the government undertakes to create proper think tanks and working bodies and pay people to do the research, etc., we'll be in a better position. 6, grant must be made available for new people in agriculture and for existing farmers to ensure increased agricultural activity as a measure to prevent us from experiencing the Dutch disease, which is at our front door. These grants to farmers will allow them to boost productivity, grow their farms, and increase their earnings by acquiring better equipment. It will contribute to the development of the non-oil sector. 7, construction jobs will be created to facilitate the government's rent-to-own low-income housing schemes. 8, we will create construction jobs through a government infrastructure development program that builds modern homes and other facilities for teachers, health workers, and other public servants who have to serve away from their homes. All those public servants complain about how bad the facilities are. Mr. Speaker, MPs and local government representatives must be provided with well-paid staff to help them better respond to the needs of the Guyanese people and represent them. Well-paid teachers and training staff must be hired to facilitate evening training at government schools, whether for widely available adult education classes or technical ones. The restarting of the night school program, which began under the APNUFC, is a good starting point. Mr. Speaker, we must not be carried away by all of these top students. It is estimated that about 16,000 children do grade 6 or common entrance, but only about 5,000 matriculate, meaning they have 5 CXC with math and English, and then the system dumps them rather than developing an evening school and night school so that they can return and make themselves eligible to work and train. Funding for community development and the creation of livable spaces throughout Guyana will create hundreds of jobs in design and construction. 12, cheaper electricity from power sources such as solar energy will facilitate job creation through various forms of value-added manufacturing. This will be prevalent in designated industrial zones in all regions. The foregoing must be done while simultaneously taking measures to reduce inflation. In this regard, as you would have recognized, many of the measures contribute to dealing with inflation. Mr. Speaker, the government clearly does not have a plan. I want to turn to manufacturing. Mr. Speaker, this budget lacks measures to contribute to the development of the non-oil sector. Government seems to be a little boy flicking and hoping he lands on his feet rather than his head. Mr. Speaker, tax breaks must be targeted, not scattergun. When it comes to industrial policy, they are vital in specific circumstances, like stimulating industries that face challenges in starting up and scaling. To this end, we call on the government to reduce the corporate tax rate for non-commercial businesses involving in agro-processing to 0%. Additional categories of manufacturing should also be assessed and incorporated in this policy based on their competitive advantage. Further, these incentives should be coupled with the grants to farmers we have previously proposed to help them to expand production to meet the expected increased demand for produce. These targeted policies in the agro-processing industry will stimulate activities such as the canning of fruits and vegetables or the production of juices and similar natural beverage for export. Further, this policy approach will ensure benefits are not concentrated in 1 or 2 regions for selfish political gains, but spread nationally to encourage development wherever conditions are suitable. This will swiftly generate tens of thousands of jobs as international manufacturers are attracted to Guyana, much the same as they have flocked similar low-tax nations. We do not need to wait for low electricity price, which may never materialize, to see manufacturing grow in Guyana. This is even more so, since the project for cheap electricity is in hands of the second vice president of Sioux fame, who presided over the most failed projects in the history of Guyana. Instead, we should learn from those nations which have leveraged thoughtful tax policy to stimulate export industries. Mr. Speaker, I want to read for you a passage from a Brown University paper, and I have it there to lay over, that describes the benefits of targeted, sizable tax breaks, as opposed to the scattergun approach the PPP uses to reward its cronies. It concerns Operation Bootstrap, which Puerto Rico established all the way back in the 1940s, and which formed the ideological backbone of the effective industrial policies of dozens of countries and special economic zones. I quote, "Perhaps the economic measure most important to Operation Bootstrap success was the tax exemption policy for US and other corporations that invested in the island. Industrial growth in the island after 1947 suggests that the tax exemption program was successful. In 1949, the United States Department of Commerce estimated that 1,998 manufacturing establishments in Puerto Rico employed 55,000 Puerto Ricans, with an average workforce of 27.6 persons. In 1967, 2,367 manufacturing establishments employed 121,537 Puerto Ricans, with an average of 51.3 per establishment. Puerto Rican, the Department of Commerce valued manufacturing in Puerto Rico $1 billion. By 1967, $21 million for the island. Evidently, Operation Bootstrap successfully industrialized the island. Perhaps more importantly, it successfully shifted Puerto Rican economy's dependence from agriculture to industry in less than 20 years. That is what Guyana needs. Shifting Guyana's economy from agriculture to this type of value-added industrial production has been a goal of Guyanese development policy for decades. The Honorable Speaker will tell you, since we were in youth politics, we were talking about that, but it eludes us. Under the coalition, we began this process by reducing the tax rate for non-commercial businesses to 25%. We must continue to reduce taxes in a targeted way to create tens of thousands of jobs. The PPP has not figured out these types of tax policies. After being in office, that the PPP has not figured out these types of tax policies after being in power for 25 of the last thinking, poor historical knowledge, and fundamental inability to create jobs. We promise you that as a government, we will create the jobs, and we have given you the mechanisms to do it. I turn to the public service. According to the World Bank, 25% in 2023. The government cannot continue to present a country where public servants must scrape and toil. Even more, as government revenues surge and government's programs grow in scale and complexity. We reiterate our call for all public servants to be given 50% increase in wages and salaries. However, public servants' compensation must extend beyond just salary increases. We must empower public servants with the best possible facilities to make them effective. We must empower them with professional training so that they can improve their productivity and advance their careers. Additionally, we call on the government to extend duty-free concession for vehicles to a larger group of public servants. Mr. Speaker, since I was a public servant, whenever I became one in the 70s, it has remained the same group virtually. We want to make it clear that we consider public servants to be vital to Guyana's development and will do everything in our power to support them. We will professionalize the public service as we did when we were in government. Public servants can tell you they operated with much more freedom between 2015 and 2020 than they operate now. They live a life of fear. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, Guyana labor needs serve as the backdrop for another lie we must not let stand. At the United Nations last year, the President boasted that spending on education will be increased to 20% of the budget. That works out to $156.4 billion this year. It may be obvious to everyone in this esteemed house that your education budget this year is not $156.4 billion. In fact, the government has missed its target by $62 billion, a truly monumental sum. What love for the public. The PPP does not believe in education, in the same way that they never intended to spend 20% of the budget on that ministry. If they had intended to do so, the University of Guyana would have been free. Billions would have been provided to upgrade the university. Lecturers and teachers would have received a 50% pay increase, and tens of thousands of students would have been receiving student stipends. Even further, the APNU-AFC will implement a student stipend policy. We could easily afford to provide 50,000 students with $50,000 a month to assist them with educational expenses. That will also contribute to poverty alleviation. These stipends, Mr. Speaker, which should go to the students of the University of Guyana, TVET, night school, and other such institutions, will also incentivize Guyanese to train or retrain in order to build a robust workforce we require. Mr. Speaker, it is very important for us to give our students stipends. Mr. Speaker, when I was presidential advisor for youth empowerment, we did a survey. And we found that when children were close to the institution, whether it's GTI, NATI, or WIC, they tend to stay in the institution. But when they have to travel and face the courts, they fall out. We need to begin to help them to be able to not only go to school, but to stay in school. This policy, which we call 50 for 50, represent the type of serious initiatives that will help to energize and mobilize Guyana's youth. We must recognize that Guyana's change in economy provides change in opportunities, and that we have a sworn duty to help Guyanese seize these opportunities. I turn to infrastructure. Guyana needs a sound infrastructure development plan. While we see the need for the development of community roads, our infrastructure development plan must see us developing roads and bridges linking all 10 regions. Such developments will not only open new lands, they will also give us the opportunity to shift our economic and other activities to highlands and reduce our vulnerability to climate change. Guyana needs to shift its development to highlands. It must be the irony of the century that this just theme is, and I quote, improving lives today, building prosperity tomorrow, while the government continues to to promote the bulk of development on the low coastal lying areas with all that this portends. Mr. Speaker, how could we say we're catering for the future, knowing the situation with climate change? Mr. Speaker, common sense and the fact that it's predicted that our coasts will be inundated by 2030, we must reduce the focus on the low-lying coast and begin to shift to highlands. Clearly, this budget is not building prosperity tomorrow. It is increasing our vulnerableness to climate change. It is a visionless budget. Mr. Speaker, it is opposite to point out that this regime continues to pursue development on the low-lying coastal plain at a time when they themselves are talking about climate change. Mr. Speaker, to shift our economic activities to the highlands will not only allow us to deal with climate change, it will also increase opportunities for ecotourism, since it will open new hinterland lands and expose Guyana's natural beauty to Guyanese and the world. It is well known that many Guyanese cannot see Guyana because they can't afford it. We need to change that. Since this move will facilitate a cheaper avenue for Guyana to explore and experience our beautiful country. Our infrastructure development must be based on a plan that opens Guyana's hinterland, reduces the need for expansive and expensive drainage system, while offering new, more safe and secure lands to our people. Our highlands offer such an opportunity. Mr. Speaker, people follow infrastructure. And if we continue to focus on the coast, we are ourselves contributing to making us more vulnerable to the ill effects of climate change. Mr. Speaker, all larger infrastructure programs must of necessity have proper feasibility studies and environmental impact assessment. We have lost too much under the PPP government by being involved in projects such as the Skeldon Sugar Modernization Project, the e-government project, fiber optic cable project, and the Enmo packaging plant, among the many failed projects under the Jack Dale PPP regime as a result of lack of proper feasibility studies. I turn to housing. The shift to the highlands will open new vistas for housing, business, and access to new freshwater resources, building materials, and the increased safety of our people away from the threat that the sea level rise poses. We are blessed with highlands. We need to reimagine Guyana and unleash its potential in the interest of all the people of Guyana. Such a shift, Mr. Speaker, will place us closer to our many waterfalls with hydropower potential and therefore reduce the cost of transmission of power to distant places. Mr. Speaker, as we conceptualize housing, let us focus on new sustainable communities as we seek to house our people. The APNU-AFC will implement a hinterland development program which will be guided by a well-thought-out land use policy. At present, Mr. Speaker, we put anything anywhere. We need a land use policy, so we choose the best places for housing, the best places for agriculture, the best places for manufacturing. You cannot wake up the next morning and say, oh, I feel like putting it here. Mr. Speaker, I turn to agriculture. Agriculture has to continue to be critical in the development of Guyana. It must play a pivotal role in providing food for our people. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the APNU-AFC will promote agricultural development in every region as part of a wider plan to ensure all regions are self-sufficient in food production. This will go a far way in reducing the amount of money regions spent on transportation and will also result in the reduction of food prices in those regions and are therefore anti-inflationary and will redound to the benefit of the people of Guyana. Why would we, Mr. Speaker, be heading food security in the Caribbean region without food security in our 10 administrative regions? Mr. Speaker, charity begins at home. An APNU-AFC government will focus on food security in every region, and the excess from those regions can go to the Caribbean regional security. Mr. Speaker, as a concomitant of our regional agricultural development, we need corresponding agro-processing facilities in every region. Mr. Speaker, basic economics teaches that location matters. It is therefore mind-boggling when the Honorable Member from Region 6 indicated that they will place the agro-processing center at one extreme of the region, I think it's either Skeldon or Corriverton, forcing those at the other extreme to incur high costs to get to the agro-processing center. Mr. Speaker, an APNU-AFC government will strategically place these agro-processing facilities so that all can access them at relatively cheap costs. There has to be little or no thinking gone into that we put it at the other extreme. And more importantly, Mr. Speaker, it is well established in this country that the east bank of Berbice has some of the most fertile lands. Why would you put it at another end? I turn to oil. Mr. Speaker, if at the end of this year Guyana never puts another FPSO into use, we would still be one of the highest oil producers per capita in the entire world. We would be producing easily 4 times as much oil per day as Ghana, 10 times as much as Trinidad and Tobago, and far more than Equatorial Guinea, to which we have often been compared. We cannot continue to operate like novices who have no idea of how an oil industry should be properly managed. Our sectoral committee on natural resources should be constantly engaged in reviewing the laws and regulations that govern this industry. Our public accounts committee must keep the industry under constant scrutiny. Our auditing capacity at both the GRA and the Auditor General offices should be expanded until it is the envy of the oil producing world. Our national university should be placed on the path to become one of the foremost oil and gas focused learning institutions worldwide. That is the kind of ambition we need to have. Critical issues in the oil and gas sector need to be under constant scrutiny. We cannot continue to have it mismanaged in the head of the incompetent second vice president. We need to ask the following questions.
Another beep.
It's incompetent you're talking about? Yes. Okay, withdrawn. We need to ask the following questions. What are estimates for the oil price next month, much less next year? How many shipments do we estimate we will receive this year, accounting for fluctuation in daily production volume? How many further oil finds do we expect this year, accounting for the number of exploration activities and our internal estimates of the probability of success? We need to do this kind of analysis. While we welcome ExxonMobil investment in Guyana, we cannot throw our hands up in the air and hope against hope that ExxonMobil will run its operation effectively and transparently. The government still seems to be in awe of the oil major and any oil company that comes to Guyana, completely unaware that world-class expertise can be imported to help Guyana effectively govern this sector. The Department of Energy under the coalition made steps in the right direction that we need to build on. Instead, we are asked to place our faith in a man who has failed perpetually. Mr. Speaker, these oversights, Mr. Speaker, after all, incompetence does not prevent the government from releasing the long overdue audit of $7 billion in cost recovery expenses. Incompetence does not prevent the government from releasing the full model PSA for scrutiny. No, Mr. Speaker, this is the work of a malicious intent to hide from public scrutiny and accountability. It has gotten to the point that when it comes to oil, the government is viewed with extreme suspicion by even the most moderate names. Mr. Speaker, when I mentioned Equatorial Guinea earlier, it was not done idly. That country is famous for monumental levels of secrecy and corruption. Sue, who leveled accusations of bribery in Guyana, even mentioning an oil deal, would fit right in that scheme. But Equatorial Guinea is not just corrupt, it is poor.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, you're taking a lot of liberties, right? And yes, and the other issue was imputing for the 1.6, which has often been quoted. That's why I stopped you previously, right? Good.
That country is famous for having a GDP per capita that rivals many European countries, while 70% of its people live in desperate poverty. Guyana resembles Equatorial Guinea more and more every day, with more than half of Guyanese living in poverty, while the PPP elite's friends, family and favorites gorge themselves. Foreign investment. We believe that foreign investment must be encouraged as we continually aim to diversify the Guyanese economy. We believe that a combination of foreign investment and local private sector growth can help us to build robust industries throughout our country. A dynamic local business environment must also provide space for small and medium-scale enterprises. Youth, sport, and culture. Mr. Speaker, we see culture, sport, and entertainment as critical to national identity. The development of the tourism industry and our goal of a comfortable, happy society. We must cherish and promote local culture and cultural events, celebrate our nation's history, and welcome tourists who come to share in our society's beauty. This renewed focus on what we are proud of in Guyana will help to bring Guyanese together and promote social cohesion. We do not believe that cultural erasure, which the PPP is practicing by ignoring matrimony, is the way forward for Guyana. It is now about 1 month from matrimony, and we have not heard almost anything about our country's most cherished annual celebrations. Resources should be invested to promote local tradition, artists, and craft, with matrimony front and center. Similarly, the PPP sees Guyana sports as unserious and unimportant, except for partisan political gains. We know that Guyanese are blessed with physical talents of many flavors, and we must set ourselves goals that match those talents as well as considerable resources. How many podium finishes is the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports targeting this year and over the next 5 years? Do they even contemplate such deliberate goals? All they do is keep telling us about grounds, most of which they haven't completed. Each community should have spaces for entertainment so that local artists can perform, art be displayed and sold, and citizens engage in relaxation. In the course of developing multiple avenues for entertainment, we will seek innovative ways to enable our artists, folklorists, singers, and writers to pursue their craft. Mr. Speaker, the APNU will give youth, sport, and culture the attention it needs to contribute to the development of Guyana and a rounded personality. I turn to foreign policy. At the international level, it is necessary that an international environment is created that is conducive to Guyana's development. Unfortunately, the Minister of Foreign Affairs seems not to understand his role, or is just incompetent and clearly lacks the intellectual sagacity that is needed to formulate.
I won't allow you to impute 416 on the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs lacks the intellectual sagacity that is needed to formulate and implement foreign policy. You would agree, Mr. Speaker, that it demands nimbleness of mind. The honorable member, Mr. Todd, should stop embarrassing himself and resign. Mr. Speaker, Guyana foreign policy needs to create an environment for Guyana to progress. The discovery of oil has opened new vistas for Guyana, while simultaneously eventuating in new challenges. These challenges must be addressed and surmounted. As the world moves towards new and renewable energy, we need to pursue these energy options while simultaneously promoting a foreign policy strategy that gives us environmental space to develop our oil and gas sector, while at the same time pursuing sustainable development. In this regard, the existence of a large forest cover must not only be used in transactional terms, but also as a bargaining tool to give us the environmental space to develop our resources. That is the work of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. At the foreign policy level, Mr. Speaker, we need to engage the developed world and remind them that we have agreed to be guided by the principle of, and I quote, shared but differentiated responsibility, unquote, and to argue for environmental space to permit Guyana to develop its oil and gas resources. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, it is in this context, Mr. Speaker, that we need to forge relationships with countries to help us to benefit significantly from our oil and gas resources. The ministry needs to recognize that many developed countries that are rich, including the USA and the UK, are seeking more benefits from oil companies, and therefore the opportunity should be taken to craft a foreign policy strategy for us to benefit from this confluence of interest and allow Guyanese to obtain the support of the other countries, including developed countries, as we seek to benefit from our oil resources. Mr. Speaker, I have outlined a lot, and I just want to make one last major point. It was said here that we did not have solutions. I think we give solutions that even Kwame can use. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, Mr. McCoy, can use. Mr. Speaker, all that we have outlined is only possible if we have good governance. Mr. Speaker, Guyana today is marked by the absence of transparency and accountability. There's an unbelievable assault on democracy. For some reason, PPP seem to believe that democracy is only about elections. They do not believe that there are substantive elements of democracy, governance issues, in which they should follow Article 13 and be inclusive. They had the audacity to tell even civil society that they were not elected and therefore they won't have a say. Mr. Speaker, modern democracies accommodate. Modern democracies accommodate civil society. Civil society is seen as an integral part of democratic development, but not so with us. We are deteriorating at a fast rate that we are now seeking to gerrymander boundaries, something that we haven't heard of since the 60s. Mr. Speaker, a clean voters list is critical to elections that all of us accept. And if the government believes, as it constantly says, that we're going to be over here for the rest of our lives, give us a clean voters list and put it to the test. You give us a clean voters list and put it to the test. Mr. Speaker, the assault on our freedoms and expression must come to an end. It is not part of democratic culture. Mr. Speaker, the politicization of the Guyana police force is anti-democratic and should come to an end. Mr. Speaker, we need independent public institutions that can act as a check and balance on the excesses of this government. Mr. Speaker, governance is a critical issue. And you can put how many proposals you want. If people do not believe they are involved, you will not succeed. Look at the amount of money you put in rice, and it failed and did worse than under us. Mr. Speaker, we have outlined the weaknesses of this budget. We have pointed out that it does not deliver poverty alleviation measures. We've shown you that it has no cost of living. It has no cost of living, no measures to reduce cost of living. We have shown you that it has no measures to create employment. Mr. Speaker, we have shown you that it does not focus on the development of our people. We recommend to you that you borrow from our people-centered vision and bring a budget that allows our people to develop. Mr. Speaker, this budget asphyxiates the poor man. This budget stifles the poor man. This budget kills initiative. It is for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I can't afford to support this budget. However, if the government shows any responsibility and is prepared to be responsive to the concerns, we might very well reconsider our position. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
Thank you very, very much, Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Member, Mr. Aubrey Norton. And now, to conclude the debate on the 2023 budget, the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to conclude this first half of consideration by this Honorable House of Budget 2023. The first half, of course, focusing on the general policy debate in anticipation of the consideration of the estimates of expenditure next week. And as I do so, I thank all of my colleagues on this side of the House, and indeed the Honorable Deputy Speaker, for their various contributions, invaluable contributions, I add, to this debate. As is traditionally the case, ministers, members of Parliament took advantage of the opportunity presented by this budget debate to elaborate in far greater detail than the budget speech can itself do our government's plans, policies, plans, and programs, and the various initiatives contained not only in the budget, but indeed in our manifesto, and how we complete delivery of our manifesto commitments during the course. Important part of the annual cycle and an important part of the annual parliamentary calendar. Presenting as it does not only an opportunity for government MPs and ministers to do as I just indicated, but also to present an opportunity for members on the opposite side of the House to articulate their alternative vision for the country, to outline alternative initiatives and proposals, considering that in a normal functioning democracy, the opposition would consider itself to be a government in waiting. Sadly, sir, on yet another occasion, the APNU AFC failed woefully to avail themselves of the opportunity presented by the debate on Budget 2023. Because instead of presenting an alternative vision for Guyana, instead of proposing alternative policies, programs, and initiatives, they regurgitated, sir, the standard and overworked and tired, old and overused diatribe, very tired, which has long been overtaken by time, which has been subject to multiple rounds of scrutiny by the people of Guyana, and which was roundly and robustly rejected by the people of Guyana in March of 2020. And you see, sir, why that is important is because we in the People's Progressive Party subscribe fully and in a completely unrestricted and unlimited manner, we subscribe fully and wholeheartedly to the democratic model of governance. And that democratic model of governance requires us to submit ourselves to an electorate once every 5 years, as is required by our Constitution, and that requires us to respect the will of the electorate. In fact, if one were to consider the political history of Guyana, one would see the People's Progressive Party accepting election results even in times when there was compelling evidence of those elections having been rigged. In fact, today, I don't believe that anybody even disputes, including anybody in the PNC, disputes the fact that elections were systematically rigged. This is now an accepted historic fact. that the PNC engaged systematically in electoral rigging for the entire duration of their time in office until 1992. And while one might have expected, if I'm to borrow a phrase used by the Honorable Minister Onej Walron, she spoke so appropriately of the leopard not having changed his spots. While one might have thought that having spent some time in opposition, that the PNC, however they now style themselves, APNU, AFC, APNU, AFC, one might have thought that they might have learned some lessons from the past. They returned to government, not having learned anything, and instead reverted instantly to their old dictatorial ways. What is even more alarming, sir, is that those ways, having been roundly rejected in 2020, and maybe I should say this, in 2020, I think most people recognize that Guyana was at a historic juncture in its economic history. We had just become an oil-producing nation. I believe first oil was in December 2019. We just become an oil-producing nation. And I think that everybody, the Guyanese people, were fully seized by the magnitude of the moment. And they had, fortunately, the privilege of being able to look back in recent memory to consider the People's Progressive Party in government. Well, in fact, those who are old enough to remember, to consider the PNC in government from 1964 to 1992. So they had a long period over which to observe the PNC in government. They had the period from 1992 to 2015 to observe the People's Progressive Party in government. So they had an alternative against which to compare. And then in case the pre-1992 era were a distant memory, or particularly for younger voters who might not recall or might not even have been around during the pre-1992 era, the Guyanese people were afforded the privilege of witnessing the PNC, now called APNU AFC, back in government from 2015 to 2020. So in 2020, Guyanese voters, young and old, went into the polling station, armed with a rich set of comparative experiences of alternative governments, and therefore better informed to make a decision as to who they wanted in government at this uniquely historic moment in our country's economic and broader evolution. And the people of Guyana, armed with that information, spoke resoundingly and elected the People's Progressive Party, civic, back to government. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt in my mind that having listened to the last 5 days of debate in this House, I have no doubt in my mind that the people of Guyana feel fully vindicated, indeed feel reinforced in the appropriateness of the judgment they made in 2020. Why do I say this? Mr. Speaker, I considered what approach I would take to this wrapping up of the debate. I could take every single speech presented or every single point made, and I made copious notes and respond to them. That would take me a very long time, more than the 5 hours of my original speech. But I want in particular, sir, to focus on the speech given by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and 1 or 2 other critical issues, purely for illustrative purposes. And I will then, sir, close my case, or rest my case. Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, a word that has fallen out of popular usage. A particular word came to my mind, and it's a word that, like I said, has fallen out of popular usage. So a lot of people might not be familiar with it, or perhaps they might. Mr. Speaker, about 100 years ago, there emerged, and I believe it's about 100 years ago, there emerged the usage of a word called bloviation. I think the Honorable Prime Minister is familiar with this word, bloviation, or bloviating. The person who performs this, or the individual who engages in this bloviation is deemed a bloviator. In case I was mistaken about the meaning of the word, sir, I resorted to that good friend of the modern man and modern woman. I referred to good old Google. And I confirmed my recollection, sir, that to bloviate, or the act, the bloviation, and this is the word that came to mind as I was listening to Mr. Norton. He struck me as a bloviator par excellence. And sir, so I, like I said, resorted to Google. And Google tells us, sir, here's dictionaries, you'll see it's defined all over the dictionaries, that to bloviate, or bloviation. I'll just share with you two definitions. The art of speaking for as long as the occasion warrants, while saying nothing at all. Or secondly, sir, an army, and this one will resonate, this one applies particularly to Mr. Norton. An army of pompous phrases moving over the landscape in search of an idea.
That's my one definition.
Because Mr. Norton came here today, invoked and bloviated for, I don't know, an hour and a half or 2 hours, bloviated, invoked all manner of outdated concepts that he might have encountered in the 1960s and 1970s, speaking about targeted tax breaks, speaking about people-centered, people-centered development, speaking about, let me see, speaking all manner of lofty sounding words. Intellectual sagacity. Intellectual sagacity. He's a man, he's a man given to using all of these big words and fancy phrases to impress people with his intellectual capacity. While, sir, beneath that is absolutely no substance whatsoever. Asphyxiating. The budget is asphyxiating the Guyanese people. Sir, if you listened, as I'm sure you did, and as I know you always do, Mr. Norton started out on the premise. Well, let's start out where he started out. I think maybe he thought he wanted to amuse us when he started out. I thought it was comedy and not bloviation that he intended. Because he started out by saying that when the PNC left office in his customary manner, he puffs out his chest and he puts on his important opposition leader voice to make sure that Roysdale is kept out of the job. And Mahipal. He came to the podium, sir. He came to the podium, Mr. Speaker, and he started out by saying, when the PNC left office in 1992, there was money in the budget to build the Linden to Soesdijk Highway. Sir, I know that you have an abundance of youth still on your side. But I know too that you can recall, 1992 with perfect clarity. Sir, in 1992, the PNC destroyed Guyana. The Guyana, left in the state of PNC destruction, was incapable of paying public sector wages, was incapable of servicing the country's debts, was incapable, sir, of providing basic medication in hospitals. Minister Anthony reminds us that rodents would be crawling on the beds, biting the limbs of patients in the public hospital. And Mr. Norton comes here with a straight face, sir, and seeks to tell the people of Guyana that in 1992, I don't believe that there's anybody in Guyana who recalls 1992 with any degree of clarity, would be able to forget the pain and suffering that Guyanese of that era were going through. No fuel, no electricity, lining up for fuel, days and weeks of blackout, no basic food supplies. That would be recalled, sir, that was the era, the pre-1992 era, was the era when basic food supplies were banned. Sir, when I say to young people that potatoes or wheaten flour were, not that you couldn't get them, they were illegal commodities. People were imprisoned. People were imprisoned for having wheaten flour and potatoes in their possession, like it was. When you tell people, sir, that you had to bury, sardines, sardine cans. There are backyards in Guyana that are like a landfill site for sardine cans. You have to bury because you were afraid to put your sardine can in the dustbin. My neighbor was jailed because he belched. Sir, comes here, sir. Mr. Norton comes here, sir, and wants to paint this alternative reality, looking the people of Guyana straight in their faces and seeking to paint this parallel, this imagined reality, almost like they're living in a dream world. Almost like they're living in a dream world that, 1992 had money to fix the Linden. Sir, in 1992, they couldn't fix Main Street. They couldn't fix Main Street. You couldn't drive, those of you who had cars, and I'm going to come back to cars in a minute. You couldn't drive from the Pegasus Hotel to the Bank of Guyana in half an hour or with no traffic. You had to navigate from the Ministry of Finance to the Central Bank, navigate potholes. There were streets in Guyana that were popularly called, I recall some streets in Kitty that were popularly called Abortion Avenue. You couldn't navigate the street if you were an expectant mother. Mr. Norton comes here today, sir, with a straight face and wants to tell us that in 1992 we were ready. Sir, the people of Guyana know better. But we shouldn't be surprised by this. We shouldn't be surprised by this because it is Mr. Norton and his party, and I'm not going to repeat, I've said this many times in this house and many of my colleagues have said it too. It was Mr. Norton and his party that looked the world in its face, in its faces, looked the people of the world in their faces, and said to them with a straight face, 33 is not bigger than 32. And they continue to say up to today, that they did not, not only that they did not rig the election, but that they won the election. They continue to say up to today, sir, that they won the election. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that in 1992, when the People's Progressive Party came to government, Guyana's debt to GDP ratio 91. Nice. Consider that for a moment, sir, that your debt is 6 times the size of your economy. When we left office in 2014, in 2015 rather, we had brought that down to less than 40%. From 617, sir, in 1992 to less than 40%. And Mr. Speaker, there was no oil. They like to speak, they say now oil of oil or oil revenue. It was achieved on the strength of prudent and responsible People's Progressive Party civic in government. Sir, they say, sir, they want to speak about 1992. And they like to be selective about the facts that they bandy around. Consider for a moment, sir, that in 1992, when they left office, the public, very public servants, minimum wage in 1992 at the end was the princely sum of $22 per month, the equivalent US dollars per month. Today, we have in $88 per month from $22 per month. It's not where we would like it. Increase it progressively. Manner that in fact therefore undermine the value of people's is progressively to increase it in a value of wages and salaries is makes in their customary PNC manner all a list, I think he said it was 20, a list of 20, a motley crew, a random assortment. They moved. I'm going to a 50% increase. Well, sir, passed before. Before. You promised it knowing that you promised it on the in fact, there was a very elaborate plan. There was a very elaborate plan, sir, on how it was going to be financed. I believe, I know one of my colleagues alluded to this plan. Sir, there was a very elaborate plan outlining how they will finance these initiatives. I refer you and Guyana to page 46 of the APNU AFC's 2015 election manifesto of Guyana in 2015, were they to be elected to office, including the 50% salary increase, including expand rice, sugar, everything. They will finance this. They had a whole section, they had an entire team sitting down. The chapter is called Reaping the Democratic Dividend. And they are 8 specific initiatives. This is currently estimated at 200 million US savings to be between. Sir, I invite how much of this they achieved. This is 150 million US dollars of our improved the improvement in the political environment. Were they incentives for the underground to 60%? Measured up against all of these are reducing and friends and family, and what was it? Sir, that is estimated to be about 28. So in fact, I should go further, of total procurement. Sorry, let me say that again. Reducing procurement fraud. 28 to 35% of total procurement spend. Sir, new AFC to account. They had 5 years. Perform in reaping. Why did you not deliver on your promises to the people? I'm not going to read all of it. The PNC, APNU AFC, tradition of selling hot air, blow, and we were of the last. But they increased well, that number is itself questionable. They may have they want to claim, but let us public service family. Family, a couple, 3 children who are going to school. One is a soldier, a policeman. increases, and like I said, the 70% number is highly by taking back school children. They took it back by that we used to give to the discipline services. Salary in lieu of leave. There's that their leave. Putting taxes on electricity, on water, on medical supply. 95 or so taxes that they're going to reduce VAT by sir. They had promised they came into office, they reduced, and they then promptly put on the VAT. Did not. So while they a long list of items from 0 to move from 0 to 40. Medical and educational, heavy equipment for agriculture, and the list goes on. So this three-card trick that the PM, now you see, now you don't, you know, sometimes you know the chick board? Man of people like card trick or the chick either board. Sir, but this leaves the guidance. People are wiser today. They're wiser. Or if they promise they will strategy and a plan. They love policies and they love vision. You mentioned a few of they love strategies out of his surveys, policy. I think what he outlined steep in theory, but void reality and reality. When the people of Guyana are deceived, you will come up with a way for big or convey Mr. Norton's and development, a survey delivered. He said it about infrastructure too. Mr. Norton said sound plan. Sound. All the regions, all plan. Mr. Speaker, who would be incapable of telling you priorities? If there's anybody of what is needed. Commission a study and get somebody to prepare an elaborate plan to tell you. The people of Guyana are watching. Promising you a plan. We are promising them and we're delivering them. They had a single new for those who didn't hear me, that wouldn't think that they want things in typical PNC style. They're going to structure plan.
Able to accomplish all of this in just 5 years, and it goes way beyond anything that this government has even hoped to accomplish in the health sector. As a matter of fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, projects that were deemed necessary and tantamount to the advancement of healthcare for Trinidad and Tobago, which my colleague from Faizabad would have elaborated and explained in his presentation, several of these initiatives were scrapped when they came into office. Such projects would have brought us to world-class status, but it seems as though those on the other side does not want that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to spend a minute or two to respond to what the members before me would have spoken of. And I want to start with the member for St. Joseph, who in his contribution, he made reference to the Welch report, which was an absolute waste of time, waste of resources, and waste of taxpayers' money. The Welch Committee did a very inaccurate report, and the UNC wanted no part of a report which was lacking in depth and in substance. The government did not need the opposition to pass any laws, any recommendation, any cabinet decisions, or any implementing programs, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And for the Prime Minister to say that the Welch report was thrown into the dustbin because of the opposition or the opposition leader, I want to tell the members that that is rubbish. But then again, the dustbin is the right place for rubbish. When we look at the contribution made by the member for San Fernando West, who clearly did not know which motion, whether he was going or coming, which motion he was debating, whether 1, 2, or 3, the member for San Fernando West came here to tell this House that we were #1 in the world with respect to our COVID management system. But I want him to tell that to the families who would have lost their loved ones. I want him to tell that to the over 4,000 families in this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who would have lost loved ones to the mismanagement of this administration with respect to the COVID pandemic. He came, the member for San Fernando West that is, and made reference to the mother of all carnivals. But it is so